It's Thursday night, and it's time for
Plastic
Climate
Future.com. Boom. We did it again, Matt.
And the guests are still here. And today we have very interesting guests because they're coming from the Renewable Carbon Initiative. And I'm happy to welcome tonight Michael and Lara. Hello.
Hi.
Good evening.
Great to have you here tonight. And as we always start our podcasts with a bit of a personal introduction of our guests, because we want to showcase that it's always a person that cares behind the initiatives that we're presenting and that we're talking about. So I would first start, maybe ladies first, to ask Lara, what made you come to the field of sustainability, and like how did you end up where you are, and what is your background, and why are we talking today?
Okay, so actually, what made me end up in sustainability is actually Michael. I have a background in political science, and I studied international relations with a focus on development. And I worked in the Philippines right after university, but I wanted to come back to Germany. And it wasn't easy to find a job in Germany. And I looked all around, and I actually knew Michael from before through family friends. And we met. He had an internship, and that's the rest was history, basically. And I've been with Nova and Michael for 12 years now.
And Michael, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get to where you are today?
Yeah, this is too long ago that I can really remember details. This was during studying physics. I was a great fan of Einstein and relativity theory and gravity and all those things. Already in those days, we organized some workshops on nuclear energy. And as you know, most Germans are against nuclear energy. So we organized workshops to explore more in detail nuclear energy. And by the way, the official data in the past is saying a big nuclear accident will be every 30,000 years. And we calculated as students every 30 years. And so far, 30 years is right.
Yes,
Harrisburg, Chernobyl, and Fukushima. So yeah, that was my first contact to policy and also to sustainability. And then we also were saying as students, okay, it's nice to fight against something, but we want also to have more information on wind and solar. So I started already on wind and solar during my studying physics in Cologne. And there I was already in some political energy working groups. So it started very, very early when I was a student. And then I worked also some years for the solar energy industry. But then I moved to the chemical and material sector. This was also a little bit by random. I was responsible in another institute, Katalyse is the name in Cologne. I was responsible for resources, not so different from today. And then it happened that the industrial hemp was discovered in Europe again. It was in 95, 96. It was almost forbidden to grow, and only the French people got all the incentives and subsidies. And then some clever people in Netherlands and UK say, why only France getting the subsidies? And then there was a big movement to make hemp legal. And I was in Germany, one of the leading people. And then step by step, I come then to all hemp, then all natural fibers and composites and all materials and chemicals. So I widened my field every year to more resources. And then in the last 10 years, also to CO2 utilization and recycling. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I know you through some of the work that you've done at the Nova Institute with bio-based materials. And I've been intrigued with biomaterials for the past few years and looked at the data that's been generated by the Nova Institute. I've come to know you. And today, I know you and the Nova Institute, more so through the Renewable Carbon Initiative. And we'll go into more details tonight. But can you introduce what is the Renewable Carbon Initiative and how does it serve as a framework for, quite frankly, most of the work that you're doing at the Nova Institute?
Yeah, before I would also say where the focus from Nova is coming from. This is the origin later also for RCI. When in the 1890s, everybody switched to bioenergy and biofuels, yeah, whole institutes. Before they made some report that it might be more clever to use natural resources for materials, but then the incentives come to fuels and energy and everybody moved to energy and fuel. And so I decided not going to energy and fuel because we have 1,000 competitors, go to the chemical material sector. And this was one of the very few institutes worldwide doing this focus. And this is the reason why after 20, 30 years now, we have the best data, the best experiences, we have the network, because we decided not going where everybody was going to. And RCI, Renewable Carbon Initiative, Lara said before that I was responsible, she entered the sector. The other way around, Lara is responsible for creating RCI. Because I was doing so much policy work in Nova without any budget. She wanted to have paid better, not paid less, because the boss is doing weeks and weeks without budget in Brussels. I have to do the job. And then I have the idea, okay, I created RCI, and then the company is paying what I want to do in policy in Brussels. And this works so well. So I'm really thank you, Lara. Without your pressure, I would never have created RCI.
Thank you.
And who came up with the name, or why is it called Nova?
Nova comes from innovation. When we founded Nova, my proposal was to call it German Environmental Institute. But then other founders say Nova is much better. Nova is very flexible. You can do IT, you can bioeconomy, you can do everything with Nova. Be clever and take this term, then you are completely free about your focus in the future. And that was a good idea. So innovation, Nova, that's what a very good link. And so I'm happy that I lost the battle on the name of Nova. And with RCI, we have created the idea of renewable carbon already in 2014. I know this so well because some people attacked me that I have stolen the idea. They have published the things many years later, and they accused me that I have stolen the idea. And so I have to go back in my emails, in my document, and I could show 2014 we have already presented this concept. Mm-hmm. And then we saw it becomes more and more powerful. It was just, I think, the right idea at the right time, and then you can be very powerful. And another point is also important. Corona was very supportive because to get the first 12, 15 companies together, without Corona, I would have been traveling the whole time because they're expecting, if you want me as a starting member, you have to come to my office. Yeah? And then I would have spent weeks and months and budget to do that. But it was Corona, and so I could connect 5 companies in 2 days. So sometimes things can be supportive you're not expecting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And with the Renewable Carbon Initiative, what you emphasize is defossilization over decarbonization. And I mean, we might know. I'm pretty stupid in that round, but for our listeners who do not know actually what is the difference, how would you explain that for someone who doesn't have the background, and why do you emphasize it so much?
Yeah, because decarbonization, the term coming from the energy sector, and was mainly related to the CO2 emissions. And in contrast, solar and wind and hydrogen have no carbon. So it makes sense in the energy sector. Biofuels was, of course, a problem. And there is a footnote in an IPCC paper where it was written years ago, biofuels containing C, but because it's coming from biomass, it's not counted. And so they saw already in the beginning that decarbonization is not a very good term for the biofuel sector. But to create a new term, because in the chemical sector, the people was never really happy with the term decarbonization, because if you're relying on carbon, if your carbon is your main raw material you need, and you speak only about decarbonization, that is not so nice. And if we came to them and say, hey, call it defossilization, the people really laughed us. They say, Michael, yeah, it's defossilization. We want to keep carbon. And so it was so successful that when I'm looking back, we have introduced a lot of terms, renewable carbon, defossilization, and so on. The most important
But I think
was
it's
defossilization
still
on the
important
impact
to stress
on the
that
world.
we are
thinking.
completely in favor of decarbonization for those sectors where it's possible. So say wherever you can decarbonize as much as you can, because carbon is valuable. It is, of course, not abundantly available forever and ever. But of course, we have to differentiate. And I mean, I'm not even a chemist or physicist, but I get so fed up when people mix up CO2 and carbon constantly. And I think it's also because the term decarbonization was used for everything which is related to CO2 management, actually, and CO2 reduction. So we want the discussion to become more nuanced, more differentiated, and in the end, more based on the facts.
And go into the source. But Lara, you just said one comment which I can't agree. You say carbon is limited. Carbon is never limited on this earth. It's not never. If you use the CO2 from the atmosphere, I calculated this for the chemical industry. They asked me, you have for the next million years enough carbon. So and then you emit again the carbon to the atmosphere. Carbon is running in a cycle between geosphere, technosphere, biosphere, and atmosphere. And with the right technology, there is always enough carbon. We have nothing more than carbon. So what we also saw then very, very quickly, and that's a bridge to bioeconomy, there is a hype in the bioeconomy sector that they can replace fossil carbon, they can replace the existing chemical industry. And this is completely nonsense from the volume. It's not possible. And it's also not necessary because we have enough other sources. And today we see that bioeconomy can offer in the transformation something like 20%, much more than today. So it's still times 4, 5, 10. So it's good for investment and good to do that. But we need recycling very strongly, and we need also CO2 utilization, and it will come. The question is only how fast. In US and China is already on a good track, not in Europe. That's a pity, but in Europe, many things are not on track. So
Yeah, you mentioned CO2. You mentioned recycling. You're touching on the different pillars of the Renewable Carbon Initiative. Can you elaborate a little bit more? I've seen the graph or the schematic where you have 3 different pillars. Can you tell a little bit about these and why they're important for the Renewable Carbon Initiative?
Definition says renewable carbon are all carbon sources which avoid or substitute any additional carbon from the ground.
Okay.
This is a definition.
Geosphere.
Yeah, exactly. And carbon from biosphere, technosphere, and atmosphere is fine. This is a cycle above the ground. And to replace this huge volume of fossil carbon, you need all 3. There is now, and this message was completely new 5-10 years ago, and today it's wide consensus. Now we evaluated 16 reports on the net zero chemical industry recently, and the concept is in every report today. So that was it's very successful that this idea really spread so strongly. And bio is also has of course some limitations. We have not reached them, but we can calculate them, and the gap has to be filled with CO2 utilization. You can also say, or you keep fossil in the loop and fossil and make CCS storage, but this is very expensive and I think not a very good idea. It's mainly driven from the crude oil industry. Now we have this renewable and fossil with CCS. Other carbon sources we don't have, and we need 1 billion ton of carbon in 2050 in the chemical sector. And we have to answer the question where this 1 billion should come from. And this discussion is now on the table for policymakers and governments, and Lara sees also reducing it in legislation, in packaging waste regulation. So don't forget these other sources.
So Lara, the ball just came to you. What are you doing actually there? And how do you see the role of legislation next to new emerging technologies in pushing the defossilization also within the industry?
Well, at the moment, what we see is still an extreme dominance of fossil resources in our economy and our market system. Yesterday, I attended a really interesting presentation also on policy options for net zero Europe, for example, on bioeconomy and everything together. And they talked about market failure. So market is failing to acknowledge CO2 emissions. So at the moment, I think the role of policy must be to correct these market failures in order for us to become effective in tackling climate change, limiting it maybe to what we can at the moment. So that is something that I would like to see from policy. And I actually think awareness is there in many, many groups. And I think in the mainstream, we have awareness, but it's still so complex and so difficult to tackle that, of course, there's still a lot to do and a lot of work needs to be done. EU policymakers have been extremely ambitious for the last 5 years, also after the EU Green Deal was announced. But also here, what we see, Michael mentioned it before, the focus is very much on energy. It's understandable, energy emissions are the biggest part of the problem at the moment, but still we also need to tackle the other sectors. And this is something which we still need to move on because this is slowly gaining some traction. Michael mentioned the packaging waste regulation, which has just been revised, and some other pieces of legislation and dossiers that we see in the European Union. Not only there, the US has put out a lot of noise on bioeconomy and biotechnology 2 years ago, I think it was. So also, of course, big other regions are moving in this. China, India, they all are also writing their own bioeconomy strategies mostly and putting all of this together with hopefully effective climate policies. But yeah, as I mentioned before, it's still pretty complex. There we see a lot of patchwork. I think this is one of the problems we still have, and policy needs to step up and accelerate. I think a lot of it is too slow, but I'm also the most patient of people out there.
And because we talked about the different terminologies also, and people still confuse decarbonization with CO2, and then you come up with legislation that is actually very clear and very understandable also at the different levels in the industry. Do you see a disconnect maybe also between the policy makers, like politicians or advisors, and then the industry?
And no, I think there's already a lot of dialogue going on, and in some parts, I think the industry is extremely getting their message across. But I think when it's about evidence, when it's about the science, when it's about actually fact, there is still a lot of education to be done. It doesn't help that people rotate their positions a lot in the European Union, for example. If you want to have a career, you need to work in several units at the different DGs. So then you can move up. So what we often see is that we have a good relationship established with somebody for a few years. We provide a lot of insights. Actually, when we send our scientific background over or from RCI, there's people usually are very receptive and appreciate it a lot. And then we have a good relationship, good dialogue. And after 4 years, the person changes into a completely different field. Somebody new comes and we start from the beginning, basically. Not always, but it happens a lot. So I think that is an issue. The other issue is that they do have a lot on their desks, those people. They do not just work on one topic. We, of course, have time. We have worked with this for decades. We are experts in our fields, but we expect that same level of knowledge, of course, from any policymaker, which is why my job is so much fun. I actually know how to talk to the scientists, and I also know how to talk to the policymakers. At least I hope I know how to. And I kind of feel like a translator sometimes, translating between worlds. And yeah, this is for me also one of the reasons why I like my job so much. It brings together the policy and the chemistry that I both like very much, and I have the feeling that I do something which makes sense and which actually contributes something to making this world maybe a teeny little better place. So yeah, that is something that Nova does a lot and that I am very much active on.
And where do you see then the biggest challenges at the moment?
At the moment, we see that Europe is lagging behind actually on investments, on competitiveness. And we see with the recent elections that the focus is shifting away from climate, from environment, more towards competitiveness, towards wealth, which of course is important. But I mean, just the Draghi report just a few days ago, it's if you listen to the critical voices from the environmentalists, it's basically a deregulation report. So criticizing the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the CSDD, the Due Diligence Directive, and criticizing everything that has been done in the last few years, basically, on stepping up the sustainability ambitions. So I think this is an extreme challenge that we need to stay on course right now and show that only with those changes and improvements Europe can stay innovative and will also stay competitive in the future, because we cannot stick with all the old models, with the old make, break, throw away model of things. So this is something that the message needs to include all the time right now. Also, I think there's a challenge of growing fractionalism in Europe, more and more nations reverting to nationalistic tendencies. I mean, this is really the big picture right now, but I do think that is a challenge also for our sector, because we are interconnected. We need to talk about innovation across borders, about feedstocks across borders. So if Europe goes back on that, I think there's a lot to lose, actually.
Yeah, I would like to add two points here. One is, I don't know how you call it in English. In German, we say die Moderne. I don't know whether they call it modern times. Because what you see in Europe is that a big share of the society and population try to escape from die Moderne, from modern times. They want to stick, old days was nice, why we should, but rest of the world is going ahead. And this is really a big conflict. And one policy expert say the last situation like this was when Hitler came in force. Not that I think next Hitler will come, but there was also a fight between Moderne and the people don't want to go ahead, but you can't stop it. And this is, so I think Europe will learn a lot of lessons the next years, how to find a new place in the world. The other problem on climate change, I think, is mainly the strong crude oil industry, because we are so dependent on crude oil. They made so much extra money in the last years to the war in Ukraine. And there's interesting to see that the big crude oil companies, they stopping innovation, they're stopping investment in solar and wind. They have fired the whole vision department in Shell in Amsterdam. Famous scientist was fired last week because they said, we don't need visions, we make money with crude oil. In 40 years, we can go back to solar and wind. Now we're printing money. And these guys have so much power and influence, and they have no interest for defossilization. They hate defossilization. Yeah? If you read their internal papers, defossilization is a devil. Yeah? They fight it, of course. And they try, meanwhile, to buy European chemical companies like Borealis or Covestro to keep the chemical sector, because in energy, there are now solar, wind, electric cars that can't sell the same amount in 10 years. Now they want to keep it in the chemical industry. And they are really powerful. And that is a big problem, because the main reason for climate change is that we're extracting fossil from the ground. This is 80%, 70%. So we have to reduce the extraction of crude oil on coal. Yeah, that's everybody, scientists agreed here. But if you read their publication at the moment, they are so sad that the growth rate getting smaller. That they grow every year in selling crude oil is clear for them. Only the growth rate is getting slower. And this is, of course, Lara, if you are in detailed discussion in Brussels, you can't see always this background, but at least this background is visible. There are people telling you can only be competitive and we stay with fossil. So there is a big network keeping this structure.
And you talked about Europe now being a bit or lagging some aspects behind. which are the countries which are most progressive?
Lara mentioned this, US and China. China, they have also more bioeconomy experts than all other countries in the world. So they are leading in many areas. And when we in Europe are so stupid on bio-based polymers and biodegradation, the next standards will coming from China. So when we getting out of certain areas, then we are not be able to set new standards or nothing. So we really lagging behind. And we will develop from RCI a big publication in October, November. We'll see how far consensus is reached, where we want to place really huge, strong instruments to make a change here in the chemical industry. Not again, as 50 others before, have a long wish list and nothing happened. We try to make a very concrete proposal to the Commission to keep the chemical industry competitive, to keep them in Europe, to have investment in defossilization, and to have cheap renewable energy in Europe. Because if you produce solar or wind in North Sea or in Italy, for example, or Spain, the price is competitive. The problem is that the grid costs are so high. To the grid, the price is times 5 or 6. So when we find a system, and we will have proposals developed for that you can get if you grow a wind farm or a solar field, and you're getting the price at your facility to the production price of solar and wind, then you can be competitive in Europe. So we need to change the whole electricity system in Europe to stay competitive. But this is possible, of course. Yeah.
So on one hand, we have the policy push, right? So that's something that is important. And on the other hand, of course, we need to scale up also feedstock, and we need to scale up also technology for converting the feedstocks into non-fossil-based material, then also dealing with end-of-life solutions, because not everything can be biodegradable, of course. What are the technologies that you see most promising?
I think there is, Lara said, it's happening a lot, but it's too slow. We are working on chemical recycling, on carbon management, on keeping carbon in the loop. So a lot of activities are there. Also, better collection of waste, better separation of waste, better acceptance. There was also a big problem in Europe that policymakers and NGOs making regulations, the industry, they don't fit to the industrial reality. And so they have also to learn from each other what is possible. Yeah? And this is all happening, but it's going slow because the main reason for my view is in Europe, we work mainly with sticks and not with carrots. Yeah, this is a big difference to US and China. And so when we develop new proposals now, it's always stick and carrots, but only to make regulations and rules and banning something that makes it really for the industry not easy to survive here. You have to support. You see how it works in the sustainable aviation fuel sector. Yeah, there you have extremely policy framework where you have no risk to invest billions or trillions the last decades to produce sustainable aviation fuel, because they have a guaranteed market up to 70% of the whole market. And this is decided by Commission, Parliament, and member states. So it will happen, and you see a lot of investment there. But in the chemical and material sector, there are no carrots, no incentives, no really way to go. This has to change the next years. Otherwise, they can't survive here, because I follow the developing US and China very detailed. They're investing a lot in green chemistry, in green chemicals, and green bio-based polymers, CO2-based polymers. There is the CO2-based naphtha we now using in Europe is produced in US. So we have to stay competitive in green. We have really to move forward the next years. And it's not too late. Now we really can. And Lara, when you talked about Draghi, I think a lot of aspects in this paper I really can join. Not all of them, of course. We have really to go in detail, because he's also saying what I understood, that the problem is not the Green Deal, but how we do it, that we not are fast enough to with investment and doing it on bigger scale.
Maybe to let listeners know, technology is not our friend tonight, so we are having some issues understanding each other times and hearing each other. I think Matt asked also about technology, so coming also from the policy side to which technologies and which kind of upscaling is needed, I think, or if we have a Christmas wish list or favorites, right? So I would always say that we don't pick any favorites per se, because even though the word of technology neutrality is sometimes abused also in some contexts, I still think it's an important principle to see for which context and in which region you actually have which infrastructure, which feedstock. So that will always, of course, impact very much which technologies will be successful and needed. However, we mentioned before that we have this triple concept of recycling, biomass, and CO2. And just in terms of volumes, we will need a lot more recycling technologies. That is clear already. We need to go into innovative recycling technologies. It's also something which we think is very important from the policy side, that we acknowledge chemical recycling. Yay, you have our advanced recycling conference journal there, John. Thank you. So this is something which is extremely important. There's lots of skepticism around chemical or other advanced recycling technologies, and we need to step up here as well. We've done some assessments and estimations also within RCI. Michael can tell more about it, to see which pathways are actually promising to have a fast transition, to come to big volumes relatively quickly. And there we see certain bulk chemicals which are needed, for example. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't focus on niche chemicals or smaller applications, which are also necessary for very special applications, for example. But I think we need to be aware that, especially recycling and the bulk chemicals will be needed if we want to make any meaningful progress in a good amount of time.
And one reason to keep the different renewable carbon sources under one umbrella and with a level playing field between them is otherwise RCI would break. The companies making chemical recycling, they don't support food crops normally because they have a mindset of normal citizens. The people on biomass, they're not so keen on recycling or CO2. So in the past, all these different groups was fighting each other. And we said, let's work together and fight fossil. That's the better enemy. And so we have always to level this different feedstocks. And when I'm asked, or Lara, what is your preferred feedstock? And we would tell one that would cause a lot of trouble. So out of political reasons, I think we need all three. So we should also, and there are also good reasons. And Lara said, of course, process, region. If you say wood is great, wood is not great in the Sahara and in Brazil, but in Sweden and Finland. So you need, of course, really local solutions. On the other hand, what Lara also mentioned already, when we want to get relevant shares transferred, we see, and that was a little bit frustrating, to be honest, that the main things are naphtha, ethylene, methanol. And they together make 70, 80%. So if you want to move and not only reach 1% or so, you have to defossilize naphtha, ethylene, and methanol. Yeah. And there are technologies outside, companies doing it, but this is realistic only possible in US and China, because our framework in Europe is not competitive. And we was working for some companies, they wanted to invest in Europe, and they asked us, go to Brussels, see what incentives are there, discounting ETS, and when we did this, they say, okay, thank you, we go to US. And this DG Grow is very aware of it. And they also will publish in the next weeks transition pathway for the chemical industry. And they will also address those things. So the Commission is aware of it. But as Lara said, it's so complex that it's not easy to move. The easiest way would be just to make an extra tax on fossil, because the chemical industry, that's also, by the way, many people don't know, the chemical industry is paying worldwide no taxes on crude oil. Energy and fuels, yes, but not chemical sector. And if you would start to tax the fossil input, crude oil, natural gas, coal, naphtha, 1%, 2%, 5, 10, this would have the biggest impact. But we cannot even get a majority for this in RCI, because the companies are so depending on crude oil. They say, if you make crude oil more expensive and we can't make any profit anymore, we have no budget for the transformation. So we need the fossil business in the transformation. And so this would be the simplest way, but it's not easy to implement.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that you mentioned is over the last 150 years, we just focused always on one material source as a solution for everything. And now, throughout our also discussions with innovators from the bioeconomy sector, from recycling sector, so who are working on different aspects like chemical recycling, bio-based, biodegradable polymers, and recyclability of other polymers, we suddenly have to realize that there is no silver bullet as we had the last 150 years, one single material source, but we suddenly have to think in much more varied or many more variations that also depend on regions, that depend on infrastructure and so on. And this makes it so complex because maybe biodegradable polymers are a solution in countries that have no recycling infrastructure, but maybe where you have a recycling infrastructure, another biodegradability is not the silver bullet there, right? So suddenly we have to differentiate in so many different aspects, and I think this is what makes it so complicated. And I think that's what you mentioned also, that it doesn't make sense to say, okay, this is the one technology that we want to focus on or the one material source.
We need a new innovation drive. I was grown up in the 70s. In the 70s, the future was just great and every new innovation was welcome. This is different today. But if you imagine, if you have solar and water, yeah, you can produce all products of the chemical industry. This is so amazing, so fantastic. It's a little bit too expensive, but economy is human-made. We make the economy. Crude oil is not paying the external costs. So we can make another economic system where CO2 utilization is the best thing you can do. And it would be very necessary. And imagine every country in the world with solar and with renewable energy and water. So every country in the world is not depending on resource imports anymore. You can produce everywhere resources. And so we could also make such a great story worldwide and just do the transformation. So it's not, we are very lazy. We stay with easy profits, and there's so much possible from technology.
So let's talk some numbers, because you mentioned, and I see the time is running. I still want to have the most important question not missed.
Yeah.
You mentioned, Lara, that there will be a report also coming out, and you also, Michael. So what are like the latest figures, and what can we say about the development of the share of the bioeconomy? Like maybe in the past 20 years, what do you expect in the next decade, for example, based on these numbers?
So
Yes.
actually, I'm really bad with remembering numbers. What we've seen, so what we actually do, or where we base our answers on, is that we do every 2 years a report for the Bio-Based Industries Consortium, for example. It's based on a methodology that we developed quite a few years ago with the Joint Research Center of the European Union, because actually there is no official statistics on the bioeconomy in Europe. We were asked back in 2015, I think, so 10 years ago, to help set up the bioeconomy monitoring of the or the knowledge center of the European Union. And first we looked at the statistics and there was nothing. So actually, when you look at economic statistics, there is no link between feedstock and an economic activity. There are some codes for bio-based products, but especially in the chemical sector, it's all mixed together. So what we do is we work together with a lot of experts from Nova Institute, but also externals, to make the best estimates that we have on how much is actually already bio-based in the European economy. There also we differentiate between shares of production that are bio-based at all, and then again looking deeper at the share of bio-based carbon that we think might be in those products. And we do that systematically. We go through the whole Eurostat codes of chemical products and all other products that might be fully or partially bio-based. And then we look at production value, production volumes, employment, and so on and so on. In the latest update, unfortunately, we don't see a big development. A lot of the shares have been stagnating for many years. I won't bore you with the absolute numbers. I think if I say now 1 trillion, 2 trillion euros, it's actually big, because if we look at the whole bioeconomy, there's food and feed in there, agriculture and forestry, so a lot of added value, a lot of employment. But we also then try to focus only on the bio-based industries and on the chemical sector. And except for the pharmaceutical sector, nothing changed majorly over the last few years. We think that one of the reasons for the pharmaceutical sector to have improved is the COVID pandemic, actually. But this is, of course, also an interpretation from our side. And so far, we don't really see bigger shares also. So actually also when we see developments, it is because the industry as a total is growing or is shrinking, but the bio-based shares, they haven't changed dramatically. We always used to assume that it was about 10% bio-based. That sounds a lot, but you also have to consider that there are traditional sectors that have always been completely bio-based. Just look at the furniture sector, from wood, for example, pharmaceuticals made from plants, plant oils used for oleochemicals, and so on and so on. So actual development, actual progress is extremely slow, incremental, or hard to see from the numbers, which is a pity.
Yeah, the values we now calculating are 12-13%, but I think it's a question how to make the summary of the data. But from 2014, it was 12.5 and now it's 13.1. So we have 0.6 over nearly 10 years. So yeah, it's really slow. And what's also surprising, we have added a few years ago, I asked, put the most important molecules in the list. And if you would see this list, you say, oh, there's nothing was really in research in RTD. It's all unknown molecules, which was always used. So it's really funny. We have the long list, and all the things we're working on are very low on the list. And these are very established things from food and drink industry, which are, for example, also so funny, Lara, we found out if you make potato chips, so oil for potato chips, it's not a food product, but industrial oil, because it's an industrial process to make chips. So there are many things in you won't expect there, but this is just due to definitions. And so we see almost no development. And the biggest share have molecules which are used for decades and which are not in the focus of the research. This is, of course, a little bit frustrating, but yeah. And the problem is, if you see presentations and universities, they always show it growing every year, fantastic. And then you will tell them, or you show them the real data, and then they are shocked and they say, what we should do, Michael? I say, yeah, you can send to the authorities giving you budget. Of course, still everything is growing, but I think you should know what is reality. Yeah? And you should not fake yourself with wrong statistics, but it's frustrating. Also, in Germany, we have a picture about the cultivation area for industrial crops. And the cultivation area was 1990, 34 years ago, bigger than today. They never show this data in the ministry, of course, because that is not what they want to show. Yeah? They only show the last 3 years, no comparison to before. So we really need to do something. We can't go on like this. That makes no sense.
So how do you stay optimistic every day?
We are from Rhineland. That helps a lot. Lara can explain more about quotas in packaging material. We have not a recycling quota, we have also a bio-based quota. The next day you have your investment and bigger shares. So it's so easy to see from fuel how it works. You need a good incentive system and it works the next day. And this we want to implement in Brussels. We hopefully can support it. And there are some member states, like from the Dutch government, they all also want to see such activities. There's a group of member states now, I think 8, meanwhile, also France, Germany is now included. We make pressure on the Commission to do more here. So we really are in a time where there's some hope.
From my side, I mean, I think it has become already a bit clear that Michael and I are very different types, but we actually are both from the Rhineland. We believe in the good and in the good of people. But I have to be honest, it's getting more and more difficult for me. Every month that I'm working on this, I'm looking at what's actually increasing, which is crude oil and gas and so on. It gets harder, but I also think, what other chance do we have? A little bit fatalistic maybe, but yeah, I mean, giving up is not an option. So let's do what we can and hope that we can do a little bit of good and others will join in.
Yeah, great. I think to summarize this, first of all, thanks so much for this overview, because I think many people just always limit the work of the Nova Institute and the RCI to the bioeconomy thing. But I think you do so many more things, and I think this was great. And to continue with the optimistic side, I have the last question that is very important, which relates to our playlist we have, because we have a Plastic Climate Future playlist that we populate with songs from our guests. It's now 3 years. And we always ask our guests to give us 1 or 2 songs that connect either to themselves or to their activities or to the topic themselves, or it's just a good piece of music. So, Lara, first
You already told us before, and I gave this the most thought of all the questions. I'm a big fan of an artist called Rihanna Giddens. She's an amazing multi-instrumentalist and singer, and she also works on topics that are very dear to her heart. She sings a lot about the story of African American music, actually, and about slavery and how that all panned out. Talks about climate change a lot in her concert and so on, but she also has a very optimistic song. So it fits well with your last question. I wanted to give you the hopeful one, and it's called Up Above My Head. It's an old gospel that she changed. And there's a song by Regina Spektor. I don't know if you know her. And she has a song about the piano is not firewood yet, which is, in my view, also a song about material and energy use, about forestry resources. So the two of the songs I like very much, and I would like to put them on the
Great. How about you, Michael?
Yeah, when Lara just was saying about positive life and positive feelings, then of course, Lara, I have to say the Cologne Carnivals music is perfect. There's only positive and full with love humans and love everybody and good life. But this is always in German and so not internationally so well known. Before, when I thought about climate change and everything getting hotter here and we're doing crazy things, then I thought about Smoke on the Water from Deep Purple. And the crazy with the flat gun, these are humans today. Well, they have also a flat gun killing the planet and smoke on the water. Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, thanks a lot. And I think what the guests won't hear, what the audience won't realize is I am super proud of our guests today that they were so patient with, especially due to our technical problems that Lara already mentioned. That's why we also lost John on the way, but he's still here all the time. And he's crying in the background that he cannot engage. But as Michael said,
so complex questions, so wonderful, long, complex questions.
Yeah. But as Michael already said, that we will have to definitely look also into the future, how it all develops with the topics. So, Michael, you already invited yourself for the next episode. And until then, we will be able to solve our technical problems. So in that sense, thanks a lot. And also thank you from John. And thanks for being with us tonight.
Thanks for having us.
It was really great.
Many thanks. Good luck to you and your technology.